You ever have one of those nights that changes everything, and you don't even realize it till it's already too late to back out? That was the night a $500 million deal nearly crashed and burned, because two arrogant execs didn't see the only person in the room who could really understand what was happening. Yeah, that happened. Let me back up a sec. So, picture this. Private dining room at Aurelia, downtown Manhattan. You can almost taste the money in the air, mahogany walls, chandeliers dripping light, city lights sprawling out like a god's chessboard. On one side of this ridiculous table, Richard Sterling and Marcus Thorne, real corporate wolves, you know the type. Richard, silver hair, eyes like ice, always looking for the angle. Marcus, younger, sharper, but just as hungry. They're here to swallow up Vance Robotics, and honestly, they think it's already a done deal. And across from them, Elara Vance. Old school, graceful as hell, the kind of woman who sits with perfect posture and doesn't wear a scrap of jewelry except a jade ring. She barely says a word, not in English, anyway, and every time she does speak, soft, melodic Japanese. Richard and Marcus shoot these glances, like, who does she think she is? They don't get it. They never do. With her is David Chun, calm, unreadable, translating each exchange with surgical efficiency. But there's a gap. Every time Elara says something, the translation hits only the surface. All that subtext, the stuff that lives in the spaces between words in Japanese, lost on them, and lost on everyone else in the room, except the waitress. That's me, Chloe. I'm supposed to be invisible, gliding around with my little apron, pouring water before anyone asks, clearing plates so quietly you'd think I wasn't even there. But I'm watching everything. And here's the thing. I grew up in Kyoto. Japanese isn't just a language I know. It's the air I breathed as a kid, the words of my first heartbreak, the voice in my dreams when I can't sleep at 2 a.m. So when Elara talks, I hear it all. The subtle jabs, the respect, the quiet warnings. When she asks about Richard's vacation, she's really saying, I know what you were up to. When she notes Marcus's stock price, there's disappointment threaded through it, the kind a teacher saves for a student who should know better. But Richard and Marcus? They just hear blah blah foreigner. And when Marcus, growing frustrated, starts talking to her like she's deaf, loud, slow English, the whole 9 yards, I actually feel a little sick. I see the flicker of pain in Elara's eyes, not anger, but something deeper, older. They're playing a dangerous game, trying to cheat her out of her life's work, and they think her language is a weakness. They think silence is emptiness. But in Japan, silence means you're thinking. It means respect. It's power, not a vacuum. Now, I should have kept my mouth shut. Every server at Aurelia gets drilled. You are invisible. Do not speak. Ever. But Elara, barely audible, murmurs, is there no one here who sees? And in that moment, all those years in Kyoto, all the times people thought I was just a quiet kid, not worth listening to, it all wells up. I step forward, bow to her the way you bow to someone who's lived a life, and I speak. Not to Richard or Marcus, but to Elara, in Japanese, telling her I can help if she'll let me. The room freezes. The wolves are stunned, and David, his mask cracks for the first time all night. But the one who really breaks? Elara, tears in her eyes, her mask of steel melting away. You understand? She whispers. I nod. I understand everything. That's when everything flips. Richard and Marcus try to regain control, but they're outmatched. Elara brings me to the table, asks me to translate, not just words, but meaning, emotion, history. And she tells her story, the car accident, the brain injury, how stress locks away her English, leaving only Japanese. Not a power play, not some weird trick. Just a brilliant mind, trapped. Richard sees weakness, a new way to squeeze the deal. He oozes sympathy, says they'll take care of everything, tries to push through a contract, hoping she'll sign away her patents, her future, everything she's built. But with every page I translate, I see the trap. Hidden clauses that would strip her company, ban her from her own field, erase her life's work. I call them out, one by one, and for the first time, the wolves look nervous. Then the twist, Elara never needed a translator for the contract. She could read English just fine. The whole night was a test. The wolves failed. I passed. With one last power move, David Chin drops a recording of Richard and Marcus conspiring to screw her over. The room is electric, the walls practically humming with humiliation. And then Alara speaks English, a perfect, elegant sentence. This negotiation is over. It's like a thunderclap. The deal is dead. The wolves, beaten, slink out. I'm left standing, heart pounding, wondering what's next, because you don't just survive a scene like that and go back to pouring wine. My manager comes storming in, red-faced, firing me on the spot. I'm thinking about rent, tuition, my whole life imploding when David Chin walks in, tells my manager to back off. Miss Vance would like to speak with you. Now, downstairs, in the back seat of a Rolls-Royce, Alara waits for me. She's tired, worn down, but when she talks, it's like she's handing me a torch. She tells me about her foundation, her search for someone who sees, not just numbers and deals, but people. She offers me a job, but not just any job. A new life. Tuition paid, rent covered, a place by her side as she rebuilds, helps young artists and engineers, stands watch over the legacy she nearly lost. That I try to protest, say I'm just a waitress, just a student. But Alara sees through all that. She tells me the world's full of wolves, but there aren't many people who see what others miss, who act when it matters, no matter what it costs them. She says that's rarer than genius.so. Yeah? I said yes. I stepped out of the shadows, right into the light of a world I never thought I'd touch. But here's the thing. This isn't just a story about a business deal gone sideways, or a waitress saving the day. It's about what happens when we underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who watch, who listen, who understand more than they ever let on. Maybe next time you meet someone who blends into the background, you'll remember, behind every quiet pair of eyes is a story waiting for its moment. Now, I gotta ask, whose side are you on? Were Richard and Marcus just doing business, or did they cross a line? What do you think real justice looks like when power, money, and respect are all on the table? Drop your thoughts below. Let's see where the real debate begins. And if this story hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that saves us all. The car glided through the city like a ship parting black water, its cabin a world apart from the chaos outside. Alara Vance sat quietly, her profile painted by the passing glow of streetlights, and I watched her, still half expecting someone to burst in and tell me the whole night was just some kind of test I'd failed. Instead, she looked over at me and smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. I could see the lines of exhaustion in her face, and something like relief too. For a while, we just rode in silence. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears, the rumble of the city fading behind tinted glass. You did something brave, Alara finally said, her English careful but strong, every word measured out like a rare coin. Brave and costly. She glanced at me as if to make sure I understood just what that meant. I nodded, still not trusting myself to speak. In that moment, I felt every ounce of the risk I'd taken crashing down on me. Rent overdue, tuition payments looming, no job to go back to. But Alara's presence was like an anchor. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a kind of steady acceptance, the same way you accept gravity or the shape of your own hands. Then she leaned forward, as if letting me in on a secret. You know, I used to think power was about speaking the loudest in the room, about forcing people to listen, she said. But tonight, you reminded me, sometimes real power is being able to see what others ignore, and then finding the courage to act. She paused, letting the words settle. Outside, the city peeled away, skyscrapers giving way to quieter streets, the city's heartbeat slowing as we crossed into a part of Manhattan I'd only ever seen from the window of the subway. The car stopped in front of an impossibly elegant building, doorman already waiting, and I realized this was it. This was where my new life would begin or end. David Chin appeared again, opening my door with that same respectful nod, a silent guardian. Alara didn't wait for me. She stepped out, moving with that dignified grace, then turned and gestured for me to follow. Come, she said. There's something I want to show you. We rode the elevator to the top floor in silence, the numbers blinking up and up. My mind spun with everything unsaid. The job she'd hinted at, her trust, the sheer magnitude of what she'd offered me. And I was still just me, Chloe, a waitress with a borrowed dress and shoes 2 years out of style. The doors opened to a penthouse that looked like something out of a movie. Walls of glass, city lights sprawled below, art and books everywhere. But it didn't feel cold or untouchable. It felt lived in, real. Alara led me to a study lined with photographs. Her with her engineers, her as a young woman in Tokyo, hand in hand with a child who looked just like David. This foundation, she said, gesturing to a wall of frames and awards. It's the best thing I ever built. We find those who fall through the cracks, the artists, the inventors, the visionaries the world's too busy to see. People like you. She fixed me with that piercing gaze, seeing straight through the years of self-doubt I'd learned to carry like armor. It needs someone who sees, really sees. Would you help me do that? I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded. That was all she needed. She handed me a folder, my new contract, terms I couldn't even have dreamed of. Tuition, salary, housing, and something more. Purpose.it was overwhelming, but grounding too. She told me the story of the car crash in more detail, how everyone around her suddenly became either overprotective or opportunistic. You can't imagine, she said softly, how lonely it is when the world thinks you're less than you are. You gave me back my dignity tonight, Chloe. I finally found my words. You gave me something, too. I always thought being quiet meant I was weak. Tonight, for the first time, I felt strong. Like maybe all those years of listening instead of speaking were worth something after all. She smiled. A real, beautiful smile. And in that moment, all the tension of the night seemed to leave her. That's why I need you. Not just because you speak Japanese, not because you were brave. Because you listen. You see people. In my world, that's rarer than genius. We talked for hours, late into the night, about the foundation, about her vision, about my art, even about ramen shops in Kyoto. She asked questions nobody had ever asked before. What I wanted out of life, what I dreamed of building, who I wanted to become. I realized she wasn't just offering me a job. She was inviting me to rewrite my own story. The next morning, my old life felt a world away. I walked the city streets with a new sense of belonging. My phone was blowing up with rumors about Aurelia, with gossip from former coworkers who'd watched me walk out with Alara Vance herself. But none of that mattered. I was already on a new path. There's a twist, though. Because this isn't just about me, or about one business deal. Word got out about what happened that night. Some called Alara a genius for her test. Some said I was a traitor for betraying my own bosses. Others called for reforms. More transparency, more respect for diversity, more power for people like Alara who don't fit the mold. People started arguing in comment sections, in boardrooms, in classrooms. Who really deserves a seat at the table? What is respect worth? Is silence strength or weakness? The whole thing became a kind of litmus test for what we believe about power and justice. But here's what I know. Sometimes it takes just one person, one invisible, underestimated person, to change the outcome for everyone. Sometimes the biggest deals in the world hinge not on the loudest voice, but on the quietest one finally speaking up. So, what do you think? Was Alara right to test them? Was I right to break the rules? What would you have done? Drop a comment. Tell your story. Because in the end, maybe we're all just waiting for someone to notice us. And maybe tonight, you're the one who finally sees. And if you stuck with me this far, maybe that means there's more to you than meets the eye too.